Welcome to the Big Fellas Podcast, where we chop it up about all things past, present, and future about the game of basketball. Where facts, stats, and context reign supreme.
That is blasphemous!
Sometimes it gets crazy, but we always keep it real. Get ready to learn from players, coaches, and fans from all levels of the game and see the court in a brand new way. And now, fresh off the sidelines, here's your host, John Hartofilis.
What it do, fellas, and welcome to the Big Fellas Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, JH, coming to you from New York City, the mecca of basketball. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Nate Loenser, former Chicago Bulls assistant coach, as well as former head coach of the Windy City Bulls. In this episode, we spoke about Coach Nate's time coaching his favorite NBA team, taking the reins of a G League team in Windy City, and being seen by being unseen. We've got a good one in store for you today, fellas. Episode number 35, Nate Loenser, professional basketball coach. Hi, Coach Nate. What's going on?
How you doing, John? Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for coming on. I'm really looking forward to it, and you've had some really cool stops along your time in the association. I think we're going to really have a good deep dive into it and really take some valuable lessons from it. Just to start, can you kind of give us, our listeners, a little walkthrough of just how you kind of first got into, whether it's the game of basketball or sports in general, maybe as a kid or as you grew older? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Cedar Falls, Iowa, which is a college town. That's where the University of Northern Iowa is at. And but my parents were avid Iowa State fans. They went to school there. They met there, and for as long as I can remember, they've had season tickets for both basketball and football for Iowa State. So I kind of grew up at a young age going with them to games. I was just the typical kid playing baseball, basketball, football, and even golf. I always used to say my favorite sport was whatever season it is. So I just at an early age just really liked sports. Played all those sports in high school. Was fortunate enough to play baseball at Iowa State as a walk-on. But when I first went to Iowa State, I kind of knew I was going to get into coaching, and I started as a manager for Tim Floyd at Iowa State my freshman year, and I came in. I was in the same class as a guy named Marcus Fizer, who was later drafted in the NBA. But the way Iowa works, baseball's in the summertime; it's not in the spring. And I committed to be a manager in the spring of my senior year. And I was an okay baseball player. My junior year, I hit 289, but my senior year, I hit 596. And so that summer kind of left a taste in my mouth, like I'd like to try and play some college baseball. So I started with the manager stuff because I had already been committed to it, and I knew somewhere down the line I wanted to get into coaching. But after a few months, I decided to stop working for Coach Floyd and wanted to just concentrate on baseball for a little while. I coached baseball actually for 6 years right away that first year out of high school. So I have a background a little bit in coaching baseball, but from that, the athletic director at my high school was looking for a basketball coach, and he hired me. So at the age of 21, I was the head varsity baseball and head varsity basketball coach at my alma mater, which was kind of a cool thing. From there, they had talked about closing our school down for budget reasons. So I went back to Ames, where I went to school at Iowa State, and got an elementary PE job and a coaching job. And I coached there for 2 years. And one of the kids that I coached while I was at Ames High, his dad was the associate head coach for Coach Larry Eustace, who was coaching at Iowa State at the time. And he came to a lot of my practices to watch his son and invited me to a lot of Iowa State practices. As fate would have it, Harrison Barnes was actually going to school at Ames. He's in that same school district, but he was only a sixth grader at the time. Karen Hoiberg was actually teaching at the same school that I was teaching at. And Karen Hoiberg is the mother of Fred Hoiberg, who I later ended up coaching with. So weird just how some connections throughout my path started to link up. So after 2 years at Ames, Coach Eustace was let go at Iowa State. He sat out for a year, and then he was a head coach at University of Southern Mississippi. And I had developed a very good relationship, like I said, with his associate head coach, Coach Steve Barnes. And asked for an opportunity and essentially went down sight unseen to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and spent 6 years as an assistant with Coach Eustace in Conference USA, and had an unbelievable experience there. Coach Eustace is known as a very um, known as a teacher, demanding coach, but holds his players accountable, gets the most out of them, and was a very heavy defensive and rebounding coach that was good for a young coach to learn under. From there, after my 6 years there, I just kind of wanted to reboot my career a little bit, and I moved back to Iowa, and I coached high school again back in Iowa, in a small town in Northwest Iowa called Spirit Lake. I met my wife up there, just kind of restarted some things. I actually coached a little football while I was up there and met some unbelievable people. But after 3 years up there, I missed the college game, and that's where I got linked up with Fred Hoiberg when he was at his last 2 years at Iowa State. Spent 2 years with him there. Unique situation. I went, back to school as a 34-year-old GA for Fred at the time. I had 6 years of Division I coaching experience, but I kind of knew that just getting my foot back in the door, I would need to maybe take a job that was a little more of an entry-level job to get to the position I'd want to get to eventually. And Iowa State was hot, and they were rising at the time. And Fred Hoiberg at the time obviously was known as one of the better offensive minds. And when he got the Bulls job, he asked me to come along as his video coordinator. Never thought I'd coach at Iowa State. Like I said, I grew up watching Iowa State, so I had already coached at my alma mater for high school. I got to coach at my alma mater for college. And then, but the Chicago Bulls were a team that my dad is from Illinois, and when you live in Iowa, it's kind of a melting pot. You can pick whatever team you want. Well, my dad used to watch Dave Corzine and Orlando Woolridge, which was cool. So I started watching them when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and then they got this number 23 guy, Michael Jordan, and obviously everybody jumped on the bandwagon from there, especially in the Midwest. So was a pretty avid Bulls fan growing up, and obviously getting the opportunity to work with Fred was huge. I didn't want to leave Iowa State per se, but I had always wondered about coaching in the NBA, and with it being the Chicago Bulls at the time, I just felt like it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. I was video coordinator for 1 year. And I've been with the Bulls for 5 years. It's been an amazing, just I look back at the 5 years I had with the Bulls, the amount of players that I got to coach that first year was Kirk Heinrich, Derrick Rose, Jimmy Butler, Pau Gasol, and Joakim Noah, Taj Gibson, Doug McDermott, Mike Dunleavy, a lot of big names in the NBA world. And but after that first year, then we had the Windy City Bulls, which was a D League team at the time, now is a G League team, and they were starting their inaugural season as far as being a G League team or D League team. And I really had no thoughts of doing it. Went all through the summer. I helped Fred in the front office and in our courtship of Ron Rondo and Dwayne Wade, and the people we brought in that off season. We made the trade for Derrick Rose to New York. So we had Robin Lopez coming in, and just had kind of turned over our roster even that first year. But late in August, one of our assistant GMs, who was a GM for the Windy City Bulls, asked me if I'd be interested in being a head coach for their team. And he said, you have 48 hours to think about it. And spoke to Fred, obviously, spoke to a lot of the people in the front office. And John Paxson was a president at the time, just kind of made it clear. He just said, because I asked him, I said, because the G League was rather new. It was new in our organization, especially. And I just said to John, I said, he's like, well, you're going to take the job. I said, well, I don't really want to leave you guys. He goes, you're not going to leave. You're just going to be a different capacity. And he said, do you want to coach? And I said, absolutely. He said, you should probably take this job. And he was spot on with it, because, as a video coordinator, you're kind of doing all the little things and you're assisting a lot of people, but you're, I call it, those are kind of the bottom of the funnel jobs, which are jobs that people like me have to take in order to get their foot in the door. But when you're in those bottom of the funnel job, sometimes it's hard to move up. So because they don't want to replace that person because they catch all the little things that people don't necessarily want to do. And it was a great opportunity for me. I ended up taking the job, and I had a fantastic season with those guys. It was unbelievable. The G League is fascinating. We had 27 different players that year, and I mean, the roster changes throughout the year. It was just a great deal. And from there, I think I made enough of an impression with the front office and even our coaching staff. So I got moved back up to the Bulls and was a fourth assistant with the Bulls. And then the next year, started the year as a fourth assistant. Coach Hoiberg was let go, and then Jim Boylan took over, and he moved me up to on the bench. So for the last year and a half, I have been on the bench assistant in the NBA, and with the new coaching change with Billy Donovan coming in, he's bringing a lot of his staff from Oklahoma City, which can happen in this profession. So I'm currently a free agent, but that's kind of the way my 20-year coaching path has taken me so far, and I'm just looking forward to the next opportunity.
Of course, and there was so much to unpack there because your coaching journey is so interesting, and you really, it's great how you're able to kind of take us all over it. What do you kind of think, especially like that, like you kind of touched on a little bit more at the end, that transition going into the G League? How much different is that? And you mentioned how you guys had 27 players on the roster one year. That differences between that and obviously where you've coached before in terms of the college level and the professional level. What does that difference kind of look like to you?
Well, as an assistant, and I believe this, your job is to assist the head coach in any way, shape, or form. So you need to understand what your system is. You need to understand what your head coach is getting across as far as vision goes. And as assistant, you're there to assist. I mean, that's why it's called an assistant. And you might have your own ideas, but your ideas can't be so off the chart that they really are not useful for your head coach. So with that in mind, I also had 6 years of high school head coaching experience. So I knew at some point in time I had a little bit of head coaching experience in me. And I think that helped me even to be an assistant coach, because when you're making those decisions, you know what's useful and what's not useful. So even though as an assistant in part of my journey, I always prepared like I was going to be a head coach someday. And I always gave suggestions or decisions to like I was a head coach, not just opinions, not a fan, not just stuff that was going to get my head coach derailed. So that way, when I was named the head coach for the Windy City Bulls, it was a quick transition because I had already been kind of practicing it throughout my whole career. Little things like practice plans, preparing practice plans, your monthly schedules, meeting with players, your responsibilities for your assistants, things like that. Those are all parts of being a head coach that you might not necessarily have as an assistant. And even though it was a short amount of experience I had, I felt like I was quickly able to transition to that mode so that we could function as a staff as quickly as possible. I kind of had three different things because everything was always changing and you did not necessarily have control. I mean, your roster in a 50-game season, I think I counted it, there was like 3 times throughout the year where we actually had the same roster 3 games in a row throughout the season. So, and that's not what you're necessarily about. I mean, you want to win, and we're all competitive. We all want to do that. But I had 7 different Chicago Bulls players play on assignment for me. I had 2 different Portland Trailblazer players play for me. During that year, I had 5 former NBA guys, and then I had a bunch of younger guys too that were just trying to make their way as a free agent. So you're managing all these different situations as far as where they're at in their career path. And one of your best players, who's one of your core G League players, who you're really dependent on, the next night, if the Bulls send down or your NBA team sends someone down on assignment, that person could be coming off the bench or maybe not even in the rotation. So I always believed in this. I wanted to control what I control. I wanted to be organized, and I wanted to be positive. And I always was trying to keep my players in that same mind frame as well. And I said it from the beginning with our players. I said, we're owned and operated by the Chicago Bulls, which means none of us are here without them. So when someone is sent down to play for us, we need to all embrace that. We need to understand what we're here about. We're here to lift them up and and get them better, not necessarily taking a back seat on our own dreams, but maybe having to figure out that, hey, if I'm going to make it to the NBA, it's not going to be in a star position. I'm fighting for that 15th spot on the bench. So how do you react to it? We're going to have NBA scouts at every single game that we're in. That's the great thing about the G League. So the exposure is second to none as far as that league goes. How can you handle being a role player? How can you handle not knowing where your minutes are coming from? How can you handle the ups and downs that can happen through a season? And those are the big things that I try to get across quickly to our team, and that's how I tried to keep our guys going fresh and mentally throughout the year.
Of course, that's the right way to approach that and get guys ready, because especially mentally, I can imagine like that toll of the G League season and the guys around you, your teammates changing game in and game out must definitely take a toll. But if with a coach like you to really focus on that mental aspect is definitely super important. One thing you touched on that I thought was super interesting was how you had some Portland Trailblazers guys on your roster and how that works. So most people aren't really that familiar with how that works in the G League. I saw how Bobo, who made his debut he was drafted by the Nuggets and made his debut for the Nuggets in the bubble, actually played on the Windy City Bulls this year for a few games. How does that work in terms of the G League, in terms of a team drafting someone, sending into the G League for another team, and then eventually being able to take that guy back onto their squad? How does that work?
So you kind of have three parts of your roster when it comes to the G League. You have the guys that you draft. I mean, in the Windy City Bulls, I'll just speak on the Windy City Bulls. The Windy City Bulls are going to draft. They're going to get returning rights players. They're going to have roughly 10 guys that are kind of their core roster guys. And they can get there from being guys that are in their NBA camp, and they are called Exhibit 10 players, where they might go to training camp with an NBA team. They don't make the team, but the Windy City Bulls, or that team that cut them, has their rights. But those 10 players are technically free agents. They aren't, even though they play for the Windy City Bulls, it's not like a true Major League Baseball system where they're a part of them, they're a farm team for their parent club. Those guys can be called up by anyone at any particular time. So those are your core G League players. Then what you have are your assignment players, which are, like I said, I think last year, it's either 27 or 28 teams of the NBA have their own G League teams. So Windy City, Chicago Bulls are going to send their guys to Windy City. Detroit Pistons are going to send theirs to the Grand Rapids Drive. Well, when I was in the G League, the Portland Trailblazers did not have a G League team. The Denver Nuggets did not have a G League team. And I believe two other teams didn't have it. So what they have, they're called flex assignments. So what they can do is really they can send their guys, the Portland Trailblazers can send their assignment players, their developmental players that are under contract with the Portland Trailblazers, to any G League team that they would like to. And they just happened to take a chance on us because we were an expansion team. We had a lot of guys that reached out that were close that either didn't work out or whatever, but the Portland Trailblazers were the first to kind of give us a chance. And it started with Tim Quarterman. They liked what we did. We had him for 3 games. He went back up to Portland and was with their team. And then they decided, hey, we're going to send Tim back, and we're also going to send Jake Layman with you as well, but we're going to keep him there for 2 weeks. So they're going to play 6 games or something like that. So, and to answer your question, so Denver did not have a G League team. So what they did, they had a relationship with Windy City. And so they actually had PJ Dozier, they had Bol, and I think even Vanderbilt ended up playing. And it just kind of depends on relationships that go. And to be honest with you, some franchises will even move their guys around. Maybe they want their guys to go to this G League team, and then they go to another one. I remember Check Diallo, who's playing in Phoenix. He was an assignment, or he was a guy that was being assigned to different places because at the time the New Orleans Pelicans did not have a G League team. They do now, but at that time they didn't. And they sent him to, I think, 4 different teams throughout the year. Sometimes it can be based off of schedule. Sometimes it could just be based off of fit. You know, if if the team is sending down a center and you have a center, you don't necessarily want to have, you know, an overload of center. It's important when you send guys down as far as on assignments from an NBA team that those guys are being sent down so they play, so they get game action, and you don't want them to necessarily be worried about minutes. So that's kind of, hopefully I explained that okay.
You did a fantastic job, because that really articulates how much of a thought process goes into the G League, because most casual fans don't really think about how complex and how important the G League is. The way you just you explained it, it really shows how important every single decision is in terms of how you send guys down, and once they're there, also how you nurture them and how important that is. So that's fantastic.
So and here's just an example off of that. So Spencer Dinwiddie is an example. So I coached him in the G League. So Spencer was traded to the Bulls in the off season, leading up to the year I was coaching the G League. He played on our summer league team. He played in training camp with Chicago Bulls. He was cut by the Chicago Bulls. Now, technically, he was an affiliate. Then, even though he was in our camp and even though he didn't really plan to it, he technically ended up being an affiliate for us because we ended up having his rights. At first, he didn't want to go and play for Windy City, but luckily, because what you get, right? You get cut by the Bulls. You don't really want to go back there. It's like, well, you saw me. You didn't want to. You didn't want me then. Why would I go to that same team? Well, after a few days, he and his agent decided that, you know what, he had a good relationship with myself, and ultimately, you are a free agent when you go to Windy City. He knew our system, and there was a comfort level with myself and him. So ultimately, he decided to be in our training camp, and then he played 9 games with us, and then plays really well. And I was very honest and upfront with him and what I expected of him, and he was great in his time with us. And I think he's said it, but I kind of probably empowered him to a level that was good for him in a particular time in his career. And he ends up signing a 3-year deal with the Brooklyn Nets. And now you look at him and he's one of the better players in our game. So it's just weird. I don't know, like I said, fascinating is the biggest word I use for the G League, because you can have rookies that have never ever played professional basketball. And I had a guy, Will Bynum, who had played 8 years in the NBA and was 35 years old and was just in town in Chicago and wanted one last crack at trying to get called up. And it's just it's a great league for players that are kind of close and on the fringe and have NBA aspirations, but it was great as a coach. And I think even some front office people will say it too. It's just a great platform for people to work on their craft.
Well, for sure, there's so many levels to the G League, and that's really what does make it so interesting and complex. Now, it was interesting that Spencer Dinwiddie story was fantastic, because most people look at him and see him as a consistent NBA level producer at the point guard position, and wouldn't really think that he had to go through all that, like you just mentioned, in the G League. One thing that I saw actually on your LinkedIn profile I thought was really interesting was when you wrote how that you want to be seen by being unseen. So obviously in the video coordinator role, you're not really front and center the way you would be in a coaching position or otherwise. How would, in that position, you made yourself seen by being unseen?
Well, there's 2 parts to that, and I don't when I drive, I think. So this is just something that a few quotes that go around in your head when you're just, I don't know, it's a way I can kind of sort my thoughts and things like that. But I started as a manager, like I said, at Iowa State. I had a couple managers at Southern Miss, and I had 14 managers at Iowa State, and student managers when I was working for Fred at Iowa State. And part of my job was to kind of mentor them and, you know, divvy up their tasks so they could operate. And I gave them that be seen by being unseen, because so many people that are trying to crack the business, you know, just they see that, okay, there's so-and-so, there's Nick Nurse, and he comes from, you know, a small town in Iowa, and now all of a sudden he's an NBA world champion coach. and they think that it just by having that thought that they automatically transplant themselves into that position. But what they don't know is how Nick Nurse had to grind and work up, or Nate Bjorgen, who just got the Indiana Pacers job, how he had to have multiple jobs and just figure it out on his own just to crack the business, much less be productive enough to be in that situation. So what happens so many times is, like, young people starting in these entry-level jobs, they think that even though their job is like super, super important to them, and it should be, that really on the grand scheme of things, it's very minuscule as far as the tasks and the responsibilities they're going to get up front. And really, the only way you're going to get noticed is if you make a mistake. And but if you do your job and you prove to be dependable, and you prove that I don't have to worry about that, this thing's get it done, and I can handle those bigger rocks as opposed to these smaller rocks, then what happens is over time you get trust, and you get bigger tasks, and you get bigger responsibilities. And then to the point of the little saying that I have, you become seen by being unseen, by not getting in trouble, by not making mistakes, by not going too fast, which is what a lot of people do, especially in entry level or those lower level jobs. You go too fast, you think you have all these bright ideas. I'm a big believer in, you need to make sure you understand what your program needs first, not what you think it needs. Understand where the program's at first, do the job that's been asked for you, and then over time your ideas will come into play. So that's kind of the genesis of that. So what's interesting is, and I'll just use an example where this thing may have worked out for me. So I was when I came to the Bulls as a video coordinator, I was very, very fortunate. There's only 30 video coordinators in the world, but on the grand scheme of things, at that stage, I was 36, 37. I had one child at the time. I mean, it is more of a younger person's probably job usually, as far as video coordinator goes. And I had, in my mind and in general, some very good coaching experiences. I had worked with a lot of different players. When I was at Iowa State, I was in charge of player development. I worked out, and these guys ended up being NBA players. Monte Morris, Matt Thomas, George Niang, Naz Long, Abdul Nader, Deontay Burton, all those guys were with us at Iowa State, who later have played in the NBA. And so anyways, I had good experience, but I was in my first year as in the NBA, and I was supposed to be video coordinator. Well, that's what I did, as I did my job because that's what I was asked for, and I did exactly what Fred asked me to do. So I get this opportunity as the Windy City coach, like we talked about, and I don't know, let's say midway through the year, our GM comes to our game and sits with me after the game, and he goes, I've seen you in practice, all that. He goes, I had no idea you could coach like this. And in my mind, I just said, I was just doing what I was asked to. He goes, you sat and you were in the back, you were in the video room. I hardly heard from you, I hardly saw you, anything like that. And at the end of the day, I mean, that's the ironic part of it, but over time, I feel like I was seen by being unseen, by doing my job, by staying away. That afforded me the opportunity to move up when the timing and the situation was right. And then that ultimately helped kind of a crossroads for my career to propel me a little bit. I don't, as far as jersey sales and things like that, even those names that I rattled off at Iowa State, those aren't like the well-known guys. Like Monte Morris had to play in the G League for a while. Abdul Nader had to play in the G League. George Niang was a second-round draft pick and has bounced around. Matt Thomas had to go overseas to Spain. And then now, just this year, he gets picked up by Toronto. So that goes back to the G League in general. Like I'm a big believer, like, your name, the amount of stars behind you as far as recruit, where you come from. And that's the one thing I love about the NBA. Like, okay, your draft status might matter for a little bit, but over time, this is a business up here, and you're going to either be an asset or a liability. And at the end of the day, people don't really care what your path is. Are you producing? And that can work in your favor or it can work against you. And a lot of those guys at Iowa State maybe were under the radar. They were good college players, but maybe not thought of to be NBA guys. But the one thing about those guys is they were always in the gym. They were always getting their work in. They were diligent about getting their workout, and the culture there and what they fostered, they obviously carried throughout their careers. And now they're guys that you want to have on your team. The guys that I've worked with at the Bulls, for the most part, at least initially, are the under the radar guys. I had a guy, David Nwaba, who's in Houston right now, who was his last G League game was actually against us for the LA Defenders. And then he signed a 10-day contract with the Lakers, was with there twice, was cut by Lakers over the offseason so they could sign KCP, and they wanted to sign him back. It was a roster deal, and we picked him up off the waiver wire just as a free look, and he ended up having a very good season for us. Ryan Arcidiacono was a guy that I worked with the last, 3 years. And Archie, obviously, great college career. Everybody knows that name from what he did at Villanova, but was an undrafted guy, was a two-way guy. Then all of a sudden he plays 1 year on a minimum non-guaranteed contract, and then he signs a 3-year, $9 million deal. So like, those are a lot of the guys that I've worked with. It only was at the end of my tenure, actually over quarantine, where Zach LaVine kind of actually asked to work with me because he had just seen how I operated with those guys. But really, those guys with the work ethic were easy. It was simple. We just needed to develop a plan with them, and their careers started to take off. And that's just like my career. I think players are this way. And as I went through that whole spiel of how I bounced around, like, I don't necessarily believe in everything being linear. I believe in having, that it can be a non-linear path. And I just think basketball life isn't always going to go your way. You're going to have moments in your path when things go well, and there's going to be times when, you might have to reboot, or you might have to relook at things. I'm at one of those situations where I was just let go, and I've had to really, really pick myself back up and figure out what the next step's going to be. And I think in the long run, it's going to be a blessing. And I think everything happens for a reason. I believe in that. But what happens is, if people have never really truly dealt with any adversity in their lives, and they've kind of had a bubble built around them, the first time real adversity hits, that's where you see guys in the NBA that are high draft picks that flame out after a year or two. If things get tough and they don't have those tools in there to overcome, it can be a very ruthless world. And I just believe in a lot of those things, and that's how I treat people. That's how I look at myself. And for whatever reason, that it's worked out for me.
So what's kind of been the highlight of your coaching career, whether maybe it could be a big win or something to that effect, where you really felt a sense of fulfillment around that? You
name a person that's got a coach at their high school alma mater, their college alma mater, and their favorite NBA team. Like, right there, I've been very blessed with those three right there. So with that being said, things that stick out in my mind, I mean, a high school game that I coached as a 21-year-old, didn't know what I was doing. We beat a number 2 team in the state that was undefeated, gave them their only loss for the year, just throughout a matchup zone. We had got the doors beat off of us the night before, and threw in a matchup zone that morning and got a great home victory. That one jumps out, even though on the big scale, it probably is, no one even knows the teams. While I was at Iowa State, one big one that jumps out to me is at Iowa State, we were playing Michigan at home, and Johnny Orr was Fred Hoiberg's coach, and he was kind of the grandfather of Iowa State basketball. And he was at the game, and it was a big game, and it was my scout, and we beat Michigan at home, and that was like a national televised, like, big game. So that was a big game. Anytime I coached at Hilton was a big deal, because my dad and we had 2 season tickets, and we were up in the upper deck, and I would always look at where my seats were. So I don't want to discount any of the games that I coached at Iowa State, but that was huge. Just thinking back up to when I was, third grade, looking down at the bench from so far away and now getting to be on the bench. So, but that game in particular was cool. We had back-to-back Big 12 conference championships. Those were cool. I mean, I got 2 rings from that. And then the Bulls, I mean, there's been countless games. My very first game in the NBA, we were playing Cleveland with LeBron, and Barack Obama was sitting in the stands. And so that was, and I was, even as a video coordinator, I was like in that behind the bench spot. So I was out there and I was in the game, and it was just, that was pretty cool on a lot of levels, and we won the game. So that will always stick out. My first G League win will always stick out. It was just cool because it was an inaugural game. I mean, that was the first game in the Windy City Bulls history, and our big owner was there, and the front office was there, and it was cool. And so that one's going to stick out. But those are probably the games that really, really stick out. But the things that probably, like, the best part of like coaching is the day that, Spencer Dinwiddie got his 3-year deal with Brooklyn. And you get to talk to him one-on-one, and you get to see him, even though it was awful for my team and awful for Mike, but just to get that's what it was about, though, was him moving on. Archie Diacono getting his 3-year, $9 million deal, like, and just playing a small part in that, and seeing him, get some life-changing money and establish himself as an NBA player. Like Chris Dunn was a player that I didn't work with. His first 2 years with the Bulls, I worked with him last year, and it started last season. He had a rough year the year before, and to go from where he was last summer to how he was playing before he had his knee deal, I mean, he was such a menace defensively, and back to who he was as a player, and just playing with so much confidence, and just seeing how the locker room and the team was embracing him. Like, those are the biggest things, more than the games for myself. Just, guys really propelling their careers. Those are my favorite things.
I love that, because whenever I ask that question, I always try to see if the answer is more about the on the court stuff or the off the court stuff. And the fact that you really took the most out of seeing Spencer Dinwiddie get that 3-year deal, or what you just said about Chris Dunn, that's the stuff that really sticks out to me, because that shows that you're really not just invested into the game, but what the game really stands for and what comes out of the game, which is those relationships and all of that. Especially too, I really liked how the first thing you thought of was that high school game, because for me, I mean, I'm a high school coach, but I feel like for the rest of my life, I'll always remember those little games that no one else really will think about, or no one knows the team's names, but that's something that sticks out to them.
Goes back to what you said, like when you asked like who are important, like, look, I have tons of people that are very, very important to me, and it's gone. But like, I go back to my parents and my high school coach, because at the end of the day, there was never like Nate Loenser with the Bulls, Nate Loenser at Iowa State, or attached to some perceived job or profile or logo. I know at their core, they loved and cared about me before any of it, and I think that's why they stand out to me, is that they truly saw me on the beginning of my path, so they truly kind of set me in this direction. So that's important to me.
You've coached at your alma mater, high school, college, and your favorite professional team. So that's something that most people probably don't even think about when they see your stuff, when they see it. But that's something that, I mean, which really sticks out to me, which is cool. So just one last question I want to ask before we wrap up. Is there any advice that you have now that you'd give to a 20-year-old Nate Loenser? And is that advice different from the advice you'd give to anyone else?
Oh, so to myself, I got it. No, nothing different to myself. I really don't. I was blessed at an early age to take things very seriously. And even though, even when I was just starting in the business, even though I did not know, obviously, what I know now as far as experience go, I gave even those high school players that I was in my first year of coaching with everything that I had. And whether the content knowledge was enough, but there was no, they got the best version of me at that particular time. And we can't control, like, you can never, as a young coach, you can never control experience. Well, the only way you get experience is to get those experience. So as a young coach, that always bothered me, and like, you'll know more, you know more. And over time, it is true. What I know now as a 41-year-old as opposed to a 20-year-old is much different. But I did know enough at that age that it was important to the players that I was working with to give them my all and give them my best, and stand for convictions, stand for the right type of things, stand for the things that I was taught, and trying to move that on to the people I was working with. And so luckily I had that part figured out at an early age. So now when it comes to like who I speak with other people, you know, what happens is I the biggest thing is you know, people will ask you for jobs or things like that. And I don't have jobs. If I had a job, if I had a Wired, I have one right now, you know, so it doesn't exactly work that way. But the relationships that you make need to be meaningful relationships. And the biggest thing that I always tell people is that, like, your reputation matters, and how you attack each and every day is going to open doors for you. I've never been a big goals person. I never had the goal to be an assistant in the NBA. I got there just because I worked hard. I tried to treat people the right way, and then doors opened for me and opportunities opened. Not always when I wanted them or expected them. They just happened that way. But that even happened even when I was playing. I tried to treat other coaches the right way. I tried to treat my coach the right way. I tried to treat referees the right way, because I'm a big believer in you're always interviewing. Like, when you go into the interview, like, that's not, I'll be honest with you, the interviews I've had to get, the end of times I've interviewed, I haven't got jobs. I've had it Wired and people knew about me beforehand. So like, who you work with is always important. And then like the big thing I try and tell people is like, whatever you think your goal is, like, you need to treat the position you're in like you're there. And because that's what, like, people, young people especially, they think that, oh, when I get this job, I'll do this. Or if I was in that position, I would do this. And it has nothing to do with that. It has to deal with if Kentucky is your, you know, your crown jewel, well, whatever high school you're at, you need to treat that like it's your Kentucky. And then you start to work from there. Like, you know, I gave each and every day. I appreciated every job I had with the Chicago Bulls, and I loved it. And I did not want to see it end. But I also treated Iowa State that way. I treated Southern Miss that way. I treated Spirit Lake that way. And I just think that's important. People get so forward thinking with goals, and I think it's important to do that. But if you don't take care of the job that you're in now, you'll never really be able to advance. And then, because if you're doing the work, your work will speak for itself. Otherwise, you're just saying, oh, I can do that. Well, you didn't do a good job in this job. You want me to give you a higher job? It doesn't work that way. So that's the biggest thing that I would tell people, because I my 20-year-old self, I never would have been able to tell that person you would have gotten a chance to coach at Iowa State and coach with the Bulls. And I think I might have tried to skip steps if I would have known that. And it wouldn't have been maybe the right time or the right end. Everything happened for a reason in my path. I stayed with it. And I'm just looking forward to seeing where my path takes me next.
I relate to your story so much and really love everything. The advice you gave was fantastic. And Coach Nate, I really just want to thank you so much for coming on. You really taught me so much personally, and our listeners will enjoy it so much as well. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you for the opportunity. I love doing it, and look forward to watching your career as well.
Thanks for listening to the Big Fellas Podcast. Check us out on all major social media platforms at Big Fellas Pod to join the chop up. You can also listen to us on every podcast platform on the planet. Stay tuned for the next episode, Big Fellas.